That was Joel Bienenfeld, the third kid of Mickey Bienenfeld you've seen up here. The other two led us so ably earlier. Many of you know that we have been to Israel on one of our biennial trips to Israel this past July. 75 of us or so from KI traveled to Israel together. And so many of you have asked me this Rosh Hashanah to speak about our trip, our experiences there, and to reflect a bit on what happened then and thoughts on the situation. We were in Israel together on our usual kind of itinerary. You go to Tel Aviv, you fly into Tel Aviv, everyone's exhausted, everyone needs a shower, so you go to the closest hotel possible, and you get there and you clean up, close your eyes for 10 minutes, and then you show up for your Welcome to Israel dinner. So we were at our Welcome to Israel dinner, lots and lots and lots of food, a lot of talking, a lot of kibitzing. We had a lot of young people with us, almost half the group were children. It was quite loud and robust in the restaurant. And then just before dessert, they told us that the entire restaurant was being evacuated, that we needed to put everything down and we needed to leave the restaurant immediately. So, of course, when in Israel, when you are told to evacuate, you follow instructions, you go outside to where they tell you, and then you wait. You wait to either hear that something's happened, or nothing's happened, or they were afraid something was going to happen, and you slowly get the story. So we were told we could go back into the restaurant, which means nothing happened. They found a backpack, and the backpack, of course, was unattended, and so they took it in some kind of special, they call it a squad, they take it in a special vehicle, and they blow it up. It was an opening for a conversation about what you do in Israel and what you don't do in Israel, why it was that our young people needed to know that they couldn't leave something unattended. It's not a conversation you look forward to having with young people, but we understood that we needed to do that. And so we talked about some of the realities of the situation of life in Israel and went about our evening. It was a wake-up call that we were certainly not in the United States anymore. It was clear that we were in a different neighborhood of the world and that things were taken a little more seriously for reasons that we all know and understand. The next morning, we were having our icebreaker, and we had promised everybody we were going to run a really tight ship, and we were going to start things and end things on time. 75 people, 75 Jews, God help us, is a lot to move in any direction. So we said we are going to start and end everything on time so we can get through everything we've got scheduled in our very tightly scheduled day. So we started our icebreaker on time. Everybody was having a great time. We were about, 10 minutes away from ending when we get the frantic signal from the tour leaders that we need to come over and have a conference, and then we're told everybody needs to get into the hotel. So we clapped our hands, we said, that's it, we're done, that was the last question, everybody into the hotel. Now, move into the hotel. And they thought, wow, she and Cantor Frankel are serious about running. We are 10 minutes from the end of this exercise, and they are yelling at us to get inside the hotel. Of course, it became obvious once we made it into the hotel at the first floor that staff were all lined up motioning us to escalators. And so now it was clear we were not to stay at the first floor, we were to go down to the basement level, to the bottom level, the ballroom level. If you've been into any beautiful luxury hotel, when you're at the ballroom level, there are those huge chandeliers and the big hall where everybody stands and talks, and then either conference rooms or large dining rooms off of that. We were quickly and efficiently led into those rooms off the main hall because, of course, it was a siren that was sounding, and we were in the area that the missile was targeted. We immediately went into those rooms, and it became clear that this was, in fact, a missile that had been launched at Tel Aviv, and that we were in the vicinity. And so every room off the ballroom in these kinds of hotels in Israel are bomb shelters. So we had the conversation at that moment about what it means to be in Israel, what the game-changing thing longer-range missiles are for the civilian population of Israel. In the bomb shelter, I told you about half of our group were children. So parents and grandparents were standing with their children, trying to explain why we were in rooms off the ballroom and couldn't leave. And they had to explain to them what's going to happen the next time we hear a siren, because now we needed to know the protocol for the next siren. And so we had to have a conversation with our little ones about what it meant that rockets were targeting them. And you face it as a parent and as a grandparent that you have brought your children someplace where missiles are designed, aimed, funded to kill them. So we had lots of different responses. Some people cried, a natural response. We were a little shaky. People were immediately on their cell phones. We now live in a connected world. And all of a sudden, hundreds of people knew we were in a shelter in Israel together. Because of the incredible professionalism of our staff, our touring staff, Cantor Frankel, we tried to be very honest and very open with our group. We explained to them that it was our decision whether or not we would continue touring, that we wouldn't force anybody to do anything they weren't comfortable with or to ask their children to do something they weren't comfortable with. So we went over instructions. If we continue touring today, if we hear a siren outside of the hotel while we're on the bus, we're to leave everything on the bus, quietly and calmly make our way off the bus, lie down on the side of the road with our arms over our heads. Do you decide to take your children on a bus, knowing that their protection from a missile is going to be their arms over their heads on the side of the road? As hard as that was for us to make that decision, that's the decision every single Israeli makes every single day with rockets that can now reach populated centers all over Israel. Sderot and those towns in the south of Israel have been living with this for quite some time. But now, it's most of Israel. So when you get up in the morning, do you go to work? Do you put your kids on a school bus, knowing their protection is to lay on the side of the road with their arms over their head? We decided to tour the rest of the day. We gave everyone the option, and every single member of our KI trip got on that bus. Because of Iron Dome, we were able to tour Israel that day. Because of Iron Dome. So we toured, and we were exhausted, and so again, at the end of a full day, a long day, we all went to sleep. Some of us sleep very hard, and it was early morning when we were awakened. I was lying in my bed, sleeping very soundly when I hear Hebrew, na bevakasha lakum, and I think, wow, how only in Israel they put the wake-up call in your head. That's awesome. Then I realized, of course, wait, that's not possible to put the wake-up call in your head. So as I listened to the Hebrew, I realized what they're saying is, please get up and please make your way to the bomb shelter. And there was a siren. So we were being instructed, and I realized because I'd been sleeping through at least 5 to 10 seconds of that, I had less than 20 seconds left to grab what I needed and make it to a shelter. I was trying to remember where the shelter was on the floor as you're trying to figure out what to grab. You're shaky, the adrenaline is flowing. I grabbed a bathrobe, a hair tie, a bottle of water, and my cell phone, and ran and found hotel staff immediately outside, motioning all of us, not even to try to get to the shelters on our floors, but to go immediately to the stairwell. There wasn't time to get to the shelter. We needed to go to the stairwell. So each of us at the end of our hallway went to our stairwell. And sitting in the stairwell, barefoot, cold, I realized if something happened to the hotel, if a rocket hit, we would be evacuated. I had no money, no identification, no clothes, no shoes, and I was with not one human being I knew. And I realized in that moment how many people in this world live that way. How many people who live on mineral-rich soil are forced out of their villages so that they have no identification, no money, no security, no shoes, no clothes, no one they know with them. They are dispersed. They become refugees. And this is how their land, their lives are taken from them. All over the globe right now, this is how people are living. We, once again, gave everyone the option not to tour. And again, because of Iron Dome, although we were jumpy, whenever there was a loud noise, all of us, you could tell, jumped. We had many people download the app in the bomb shelter called Red Alert. Unfortunately, B, why do I say unfortunately? Because A, there was nothing we could do about anything that was launched. B, they were being launched all day long, every single day. So the apps were going off on everybody's phone. Red Alert was going off every time a missile was launched, which was all the time during our trip. Because of Kippat Barzel, because of the Iron Kippah, as they call it in Israel. We had a fantastic and amazing trip. So people have asked me, what are my reflections? What was it like to be there? This wasn't the first time I'd been in Israel when something happened. The last trip one of the trips I led from Duluth, Minnesota with my congregation, we were there when the Second Lebanon War broke out. 2 people are here who remember that, Bubby and Peg. And at that time, we were aware that something was happening. Certainly there was in the atmosphere something. There was concern about what it was going to mean for the troops. There was a lot of concern about security on the northern border and would it escalate into a bigger regional conflict. But it was different this time in Israel. This time, the anxiety in the general population was far higher. You could tell that something had seriously changed. This was not isolated anymore. Not that Israelis don't feel for the people at the north or the people at the south when it happens. This now, though, meant all of Israel was in range, most of Israel, in range of rockets that were being fired all day long, every day. And once the decision was taken to begin Operation Protective Edge, there was an absolute obsession in Israel with the deployment of troops. Because what we forget outside of the state of Israel, the population the size of the state of Vermont, is that every single soldier that's deployed is a son, a husband, a nephew, a best friend, a college roommate. Because there's no choice in Israel about going to the military. No one gets to choose. Every single citizen of Israel serves in the Israel Defense Forces. Everyone. And so there's no even ability for parents to pretend. There's no possibility for a parent to kind of live in some kind of la-la land about what their child might be facing. Because the parents were in the army. The parents know what happens if you're taken. And they're sending their children. And they don't have a choice. So in Israel, every soldier that's deployed is one of theirs. And they hate it that they have to send their children to the army. This was so clear to us in the first days of Operation Protective Edge. Several soldiers were killed, and as soon as their names were released, it was published on a huge page in the newspaper that the first few that were killed were lone soldiers. Lone soldiers are people who have made aliyah to Israel. They've left everything, and everyone, their whole family. These are not people who made aliyah with their families. These are young men, boys, who leave everything to make aliyah. They were the first to die in the operation in Gaza. 30,000 Israelis attended that funeral. 23,000 the next funeral, the next day of the lone soldier who was killed. 30,000 stopped their day. 50,000 in 2 days stopped their lives to pay respect to these boys who gave their lives. We talked with our tour guides about how difficult it is to know that you're not going to know where your buddies are, where your cousin is, where your next door neighbor's son is. Because the last thing they do before going in is they drop their cell phones in a bag. And you don't hear from them until they come home or until you hear their name on the radio announced as a fallen soldier. And this time, there was such palpable agony in Israel, knowing that there were going to be civilian deaths in Gaza. Agony. And out of that agony, real anger at an organization like Hamas that uses children as human shields, that places them knowing they're going to be in danger, that launches missiles from next to UN schools, from underneath buildings that they know are going to draw fire where innocents are involved. It was morally excruciating, the choices that Israel and her citizens had to make, and nobody felt good about them. Nobody. And they resented Hamas for putting them in that position and for endangering innocent civilians in Gaza. What we heard then when we would turn on CNN or turn on any kind of news to try to hear what was happening, what did we see? What did we hear? Of course, Israel condemned for what was called a disproportionate response. You have to remember, we're standing with children, with rockets designed to commit as much atrocity as possible. Disproportionate is what Israel is being charged with being. Rabbi Eric Yaffe, former head of the Reform movement, said, if the world wants a proportionate response from Israel, then you're asking Israel to do something morally reprehensible. Because a proportionate response to a rocket launched and aimed at a civilian target, a proportionate response is one launched from Israel at civilian targets. That is not what Israel wants, is a proportionate response. God forbid. Iron Dome, as I said, kept us safe. Iron Dome was developed by people that the military and the general thinking considered naive, silly. Brigadier General Danny Gold, former head of research and development at the Defense Ministry, one of the developers of Iron Dome, said funding was frozen for Iron Dome. They told him he was living in science fiction fantasy land. His system would never be reliable enough, it would be too expensive, and it couldn't be developed in time anyway. Forget about it. Former Defense Minister Amir Peretz, who wanted to push through Iron Dome as truly the best way to respond to the threat of rockets being launched at civilian targets in Israel, says that he would be in a room, often in meetings with 25 or more of Israel's highest ranking officers who had 500 years of military experience between them. And they told him, forget about it. You're naive, it's silly, forget about it. Can't happen. But he knew, having lived in Sderot, having lived in the trauma of constant interruption of life by rockets and being in bomb shelters, people take showers, mothers take showers in bathing suits in the south of Israel because they have less than 15 seconds to gather all of their children, if they can, and get to a shelter. if they're in the middle of washing their hair. That's their life. He knew that had to stop. And so he was ready to think outside the military box. And he says, it was good that I, a civilian, was there thinking out of the military box and challenging their customary way of thinking. What if Amir Peretz and Dr. Danny Gold had believed that it's not possible to have an approach that's about defense, to be called naive and inexperienced, to have accepted with cynicism, despair, and resignation a PTSD response if there's nothing we can do? But they didn't. And because of that, we traveled Israel. And because of that, mass atrocities were averted. And because of that, whether we agree or disagree, because of that, whether we agree or disagree with how Israel handled the response, it was far more measured than would have been possible had there been mass civilian deaths because of these rockets. I was recently discussing with a member of the congregation how the rabbis throughout history made decisions, and did they ever come to decisions that they really couldn't make, that they couldn't solve? And I said, no, they're rabbis. Of course they're going to have a decision. Of course there's going to be an answer. They're rabbis. But how did they make their answer? If you look at a page of Talmud, you have a little bit of Mishnah, and then you have some Gemara, some discussion, some arguing about the Mishnah. And then the rest of the page of Talmud is arguing about the arguing. We're Jews. Debate is a sport for us. We've codified our debates and our arguments. And the way the rabbis made decisions is always by majority. And the majority decision was considered binding. And the minority opinion was always on the page. Always recorded immediately following the way the halacha would go. Because the rabbis were wise and mature leaders. They were visionaries, and they were never so arrogant as to assume that because the majority rules, and that's the decision that's going to happen, and that's the way we're going to go, that they were right. They accepted a decision had to be made, and they accepted that it would go by the majority. But they never claimed they were right. They included the minority view that's called naive, silly, suicidal, whatever, traitorous, on the page. Because they knew circumstances could change like that, and the minority opinion of today becomes the majority opinion and the best, wisest course forward tomorrow. We want very much to stand with Israel and her people. We want very much to engage as a community in learning and in conversation about Israel. So if you go outside, you will find postcards that say, "Help KI, help Israel." And it tells you how you can invest in the state of Israel. You can invest so that she can get the capital she needs. It's not even tzedakah, because it's an investment. We also ask that you help us do what we have found to be the best way to educate about Israel, to create understandings about all the kinds of discussions that need and should happen about what's happening in Israel, and that is to take people to Israel. Cantor Frankel has seen far more of it than I have, having been with KI for so long, but certainly in my 18 years as a rabbi, it is the best way to create Chovavei Tzion, lovers of Zion, is to go. Send your kids, send your grandkids, send your third cousin twice removed. This is how we come to have a changed understanding of what happens in Israel, is to be there. They need us to be there. They want us to be there. So you'll find your card out there about how you can help us take people to Israel through the Israel Travel and Study Fund at KI. And as we engage with Israel, let us remember the wisdom of the rabbis. Let us welcome every voice on the page. Let us engage in honest and heartfelt dialogue and discussion. And let's just do some fun things about being connected to this amazing homeland, this language, this history, this crazy way we view the world. There's a lot of despair right now in the world, which I'll talk about on Yom Kippur. But I want to close with Yossi Klein Halevi, his thoughts on coming into Rosh Hashanah, this particular new year. You can find his full comments on our website after today, his full article from the Times of Israel and entering Rosh Hashanah. As I've said, there's a lot of despair, and even about the condition of our discussion about the topic of Israel. He writes, "We will persevere. We will persevere because the Jewish fanatics of the far right and the far left, those who have a ready answer to all our dilemmas and who contribute each in their own way to Israel's isolation, are a minority. Most Jews instinctively know that to be a Jew means to balance paradoxes: security and morality, realism and vision, particularism and universalism, self-defense and self-critique. This year especially," he writes, "I will pray that we have the wisdom to hold together as a people, despite the growing pressures on us to fragment and turn against each other. Most Jews share the same hope of a strong Israel at peace with its neighbors. We will continue to argue about the best way to achieve that, but as partners, aware that there are no easy answers, that none of us can speak for the totality of Jewish wisdom, that we need each other's insights to be a whole people, that we cannot thrive without being a whole people." The Hebrew word for whole, shalem, the root of the word shalom. Let us move into this new year together, a whole people, that we might this coming year contribute to a world that knows more shalom. Shana Tova. A prayer for the state of Israel. Avinu Shebashamayim, our parent in heaven.